Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. On the program today, we gain insight into how immigration and asylum policy by the Biden administration may be affecting those seeking refuge in the United States. In a few minutes, we will be joined by an immigration attorney who leads an El Paso organization working with immigrants and refugees. But first, we take you to a historic event held on the U.S.-Mexico border that allowed for families to reconnect for only minutes after being separated, sometimes for years. Our producer, Evelyn Sandoval, shares the sights and sounds from the 10th annual Hugs Not Walls event.
Se van alineando, por favor.
I'll mention that this is the 10th event, and not event has been as difficult as this one. And in the other side, we'll have families, a family unit. That's the picture of the border today. So this event has more significance than before, because it is happening in the middle of everything against migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and border residents.
Vengo a visitar, a ver la familia. Vengo a ver a mi hermana, mi papá, mi abuela, unas tías. Y pues me siento a gusto, bien de verlos.
¿Cuántos años han pasado que no los has visto?
2 años tengo, 2 años que no los veo.
These people on both sides, like they're people, and they, like every one of us, they just want to be together. They just want to live a simple life. They just want to work. They want to go to get an education, like every other person who lives in the United States.
We thank the Border Network for Human Rights for preparing this tremendous place of coming together, of unity, of breaking down walls and building bridges. We work diligently in partnership with our partners throughout the world who are suffering because of the plight of humanity.
What we are seeing right now, or what's going to happen, is not normal. We shouldn't have to meet under these circumstances.
Familia 7, empezar a caminar. Así, familia 7. Un poquito para que se acomode la familia 6. Sí. Con cuidado, por favor.
Immigration policies are inhumane, and the immigration system is in crisis. Politicians have been using this issue only to their advantage, but we need real solution and not just band-aids. The bills that are in the Texas legislature is proposing right now are based on far-right, racist, and xenophobic beliefs. We don't need civilians, militaries in our border. We need a reform to the entire immigration system, and it needs to be comprehensive and humane. We need immigration reform now.
So we promise this, that while they continue separating families, we'll continue bringing families together.
Faltan 2 minutos, empezar a despedirse, empezar a dar sus abrazos. 2 minutos.
As Title 42, the pandemic-era immigration policy that quickly expelled migrants, was close to expiring, the rising number of asylum seekers being dropped off in El Paso captured national attention and prompted the city to implement a state of emergency. Organizations working with immigrants and refugees worked overtime to assist asylum seekers as they prepared to move on to their next destination and to plead their case for asylum in the U.S., which could take years. Joining us today to discuss immigration policy and how it affects those seeking asylum is attorney Melissa Lopez, who is the executive director of the Diocesan Migrant and Refugee Services in El Paso. Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'd like to start off with learning a little bit more about what your organization offers in terms of programs and services.
So we offer a pretty wide range of services, but we focus exclusively in the area of immigration benefits. And so we help people with everything from applying for residency through family members to applying for citizenship, naturalization, to helping those that are seeking asylum, working with survivors of crime and other victims. And then we have quite a bit of our work is focused on educating the community. So we have programs that are focused on going into detention centers or settings in the community where people find themselves going through this immigration process, and us going there to give them information so that they have a better sense of what's to come and then can make more informed decisions when they're facing those circumstances.
Dealing with the immigration process can be very complicated. We just got past a time when immigration policy changed with the ending of Title 42. Can you share with us just how complicated the process is?
You know, I would have to say that in general, people often ask, you know, is immigration complicated? I would have to say that next to the United States tax code, the immigration section of the law is probably the most complex. There are so many caveats and things that apply and change, and there's policies and regulations, and so it is incredibly complicated. There are some aspects of it that you know, people could probably navigate on their own, but we definitely recommend always speaking to an attorney before taking any sort of, you know, action, applying for any benefits, because you may not realize that you may have an issue that makes you ineligible for a benefit, or you may need to provide further information, further context, a better explanation for certain things. And so we always recommend having that people have an attorney to consult with first before embarking on this very complicated journey that is the immigration system.
What sort of benefits are available for folks who are seeking asylum in the U.S.?
You know, there's 3 forms of asylum, essentially. So you have asylum, withholding of removal, and then what we have what we call the Convention Against Torture Benefits, or CAT relief. They're all pretty complex, and so asylum is the easiest to obtain. And then from there, you would go to withholding, and then the Convention Against Torture Benefit. And, I have to say that it is one of the more difficult forms of relief that you can obtain here in the United States. Here locally in El Paso, the average approval rate for the immigration courts is about 4%, meaning that 96% of the cases that go before the El Paso Immigration Court are denied. But what we have found is that when, and the statistics bear this out, that when somebody has legal representation, they have an attorney representing them, their chances of being successful in their case go up exponentially, 5 times more likely to win your case for asylum if you have an attorney representing you.
The immigration court system, there's been a lot of reporting on just how backed up it is. Can you give us an understanding of just how long people may wait before they can plead their case in court?
I can tell you that, so I've been with the organization, with DMRS, for almost 16 years, and I can tell you that there are cases that we have had pending probably nearly the entire 16 years that I've been here. And so I would say that on average for somebody entering the country right now who wants to seek asylum, I would venture to guess that they're probably going to be waiting, 2 to 3 years minimum. And that's just for their initial court decision. If there are appeals, then you're talking about additional years on top of that. So a significant amount of time that they would have to wait in order to be able to navigate the asylum system and be able to get a resolution to their case before the immigration court.
During that time when people are waiting to plead their case in court, what are their options when it comes to possibly working and being able to support themselves?
So under some circumstances, they are able to get work authorization, but it's not automatic. And so not everybody will necessarily qualify. And so it is really important, that piece especially, it is important to consult with an attorney, because there are certain things that an individual applying for asylum could do that would inadvertently make them ineligible for work authorization. And so it is really important that they know that the steps that they're taking to move their case forward, to be diligent, aren't going to negatively impact them and cause them to be ineligible for a work authorization. So some can work. I would say the vast majority do obtain work authorization and are able to work during the pendency of their asylum cases.
El Paso and border communities saw an increase in folks being dropped off by border officials, folks who are seeking asylum in the U.S. before the expiration of Title 42. Can you give us an understanding of just how busy of a time that was for your organization?
Probably, I have to say, to be real honest, probably the most busy that we've been in the entire 16 years that I've been with the organization. I have colleagues and mentors that have been doing this work far longer than I have, and they said that they had never seen numbers like what we had. But I think we have to contextualize it a little bit, because people have to remember that because of Title 42 and because of COVID, we had people, thousands and thousands of people that had been waiting in Mexico since 2020 for an opportunity to enter the United States and seek asylum. And so those pathways were really pretty much closed to people during COVID. And so as a result, you had this accumulation of people who would normally have entered, several thousand per month. You had this accumulation of people that were now stuck in northern Mexico waiting to be able to enter the United States. And so we saw many of them enter in the weeks before Title 42 was lifted.
There's been a lot of reporting on just how dangerous of a journey many folks have taken to get to the U.S. to seek asylum during that time when folks were waiting in Mexico. What are the dangers that they may have encountered while they're just waiting across the border?
For a lot of them, it was a really unsafe time. We just like we have accents, for those of us here in the U.S. that are from different parts of the country, the same is true for the Spanish-speaking world. And so, for somebody who speaks Spanish, yes, they know the language, but they stick out like a sore thumb, to use that phrase. And so, for many of them, they faced extortion, kidnapping, they were the victims of some pretty severe crimes at times. And unfortunately, those were the individuals that we were often able to help enter the United States during Title 42, right? Those people who we could show were suffering active danger at the time and really needed to be allowed to enter as soon as possible.
With the expiration of Title 42, we now see Title 8 as the policy in effect along the border and for those seeking asylum. Can you give us an understanding of what the major changes are going back to Title 8?
Sure, and I thank you for that. I think a lot of people forget that Title 8 is really the immigration law, right? So that's been what we've been using for, decades. And so we returned to that. So this is not a new world that we're living in, but I will say that things have changed. There's a higher standard for people now to meet in order to be able to even be able to apply for asylum. There's new rules that for how quickly they need to apply, and this process, this idea of expediting this process for them. A lot of the rules that we're seeing kind of that have come about since Title 42 was lifted and towards the end of Title 42 were really geared towards, I think the idea was to give people a fair shot at the process, but unfortunately these timelines that have been built in are so unrealistic. The idea of having to speak to somebody about your asylum claim within 24 hours of arriving in the United States is a really difficult thing to do, because you are dealing with people who are literally in the midst of trauma. They have, recently traveled, they've been living in an unsafe environment in Mexico, and then they finally have a chance to enter, and within 24 hours of them coming to the US, you expect them to be able to tell you their whole story. One of the things that we know about working with survivors of trauma is that you really have to work with them over a period of time to build trust so that they can tell you those terrible details that are really essential to making a good asylum claim. And so, the new system, or the return to the old system, is welcome, because people will finally have a chance to actually seek, asylum and apply for it. But it's certainly not gotten any easier than it was prior to the pandemic.
What sort of resources does your organization offer to folks who may be coming from traumatic experiences during their journey?
So we do a number of different things. We have we have a team that's dedicated to working with survivors, and so we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our staff is trauma informed and understands. It's really tough, because in order to make a really good claim for asylum, you often have to force people to relive that trauma. But we also want to make sure that we do that in the healthiest way for them. And so we try to be really sensitive to the things that they've been through, and try and make sure that if they need support, if they need, therapy, or they need any sort of mental health counseling of any kind, that we make sure to make those referrals so that they can get that assistance. And then in addition to that, we provide legal representation, which having somebody stand by you throughout the course of your legal proceeding is often probably the most comforting thing, I would say. Having them be able to understand the difficulties that you've been through, and understand how to work with you and how to speak to you, but also just knowing that somebody's standing there with you goes a really, really long way for people.
Now, we've seen a number of families making the journey, people by themselves making the journey, also unaccompanied minors. How does your organization address unaccompanied minors who may be seeking asylum in the U.S.?
Sure. So we are funded by the U.S. government to work with unaccompanied children, and we're the only program in this area that works with unaccompanied children who are inside of the system that's built for them by the U.S. government. And so for those children, we provide them with Know Your Rights presentations. We speak to them one-on-one to get the details of their circumstances. And then where necessary, we will provide legal representation to them as well. And then the important part of that is that we've seen some circumstances where, for example, a child was actually not unaccompanied, but they entered with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent who perhaps didn't have legal custody of them. And so part of what we try to do through our Unaccompanied Children's program is connect them back with those family members so that they can be reunited as quickly as possible.
There's hundreds of thousands of people living in the U.S. Who are in the DACA program, and they're waiting to learn about what their future might be. We've interviewed many over the years, and they've expressed that feeling of being trapped in a limbo, waiting to find out what their future is. Can you give us an understanding of where we're at with the DACA program and what's at stake right now with the ruling in Texas?
So currently the DACA program is continuing to move forward for those that already have DACA. So if somebody already has that status or has had it in the past, they are able to apply to renew that status. And so for those individuals, things are kind of moving as they have been since 2012. Unfortunately, for individuals who have never applied for DACA, they are not able to submit applications at this time. And so that's what the Texas ruling really affected, is that ability for people to file first-time applications. And so we continue to see, this entire group of people that have been educated here in the United States, that are taxpayers, that are active participants in our economy, who are stuck in limbo. And unfortunately, as of right now, there is no permanent solution for them, but studies have shown that 70%, upwards of 70% of Americans support a permanent status for individuals who have DACA.
Yeah, many of them may own homes as well. And I think there's been a lot of research out there showing just how that could affect our economy as well if these folks were no longer able to work in the U.S. Can you kind of give us an understanding about just how big of an impact that may have in our region?
I mean, it's huge. You think about the number of people, even just that attend UTEP and NMSU, right? Many of them are international students. Many of them, we see a lot of DACA individuals with DACA status who are teachers in our schools. There's already a shortage of teachers, and there's this huge difficulty with hiring across the region and across the country. We have tons and tons of job vacancies and just not enough people to fill them. And so the estimates, I've seen estimates for El Paso alone, 25,000, anywhere up to like 40 or 50,000 potential DACA holders in El Paso alone. And so you think about taking that number of people out of the workforce, it would be a huge, huge impact to us locally. And the reality is that these are individuals who the government has vetted, who the government has determined, should be able to live and work and travel within the United States. And so for many of them, they are very integral to not just our economy, but our communities. They play important roles in the lives of children, in the lives of their employers. And so it would not only be an economic hit, it would also be, I think, in a lot of ways, a cultural hit to us, and to lose this population of people that have invested of themselves in us and in our communities.
Another group of folks who may be seeking resources with your organization is refugees from Afghanistan. Can you share with us what sort of resources you provide and just kind of where things are at with their future in the United States?
Sure. So for those people that came in from Afghanistan, they came in with a little bit different posture than their typical asylum seeker. Many of them came in with a type of status that will very quickly allow them to apply for residency. And so for most of them, they should be able to apply for residency, within a year or so of having entered the United States. Some of them may have to seek asylum, but asylum, given our involvement in Afghanistan as a country militarily, I think, their cases for asylum are often going to be quite strong. For many of them, they're at a point now where they've had work authorization for about a year. And so they're probably at that point of renewing that work authorization, and then trying to see what permanent benefits might be available to them and hopefully working through those. We haven't seen a huge number of Afghans that have stayed in our region, but certainly, we have, served the Afghan population. We did work at Fort Bliss when they were being housed at Fort Bliss. And over the course of those few months, saw about 13,000 Afghans and worked with them in various contexts over the course of 3 months.
Okay, we just have over a minute left with you, but I'd like to hear from you and get your perspective on what you think may be the biggest mistakes or misinformation out there when it comes to dealing with asylum seekers that we see in the mainstream media. Can you share with us what misinformation concerns you?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is this idea that they're coming here to take from us. The reality is that we're talking about individuals who have suffered, who have lost everything, who are only making this very treacherous and traumatic journey because they feel like they have no other choice. And so this idea that they're here to harm or do us harm in the country is just completely inaccurate. And I would invite anybody who hasn't yet had the opportunity to sit with an asylum seeker and hear their story, and let them share with you why they are here. And I think people will find that will change many things for them, not just intellectually, but also when it comes to the heart and how you feel about this issue.
Melissa Lopez is an attorney and executive director of Diocesan Migrant and Refugee Services in El Paso. Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's program. Remember, you can visit our website, krwg.org, to keep updated with the latest news. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.